Hey guys, Trey here with another forecast discussion for this upcoming severe weather outbreak likely to unfold starting tonight into Thursday for the southern plains out toward the east coast states. You can see the SPC outlooks very colorful over the next 3 days, starting tonight with a slight risk from southern Kansas down into central Texas with an attendant tornado threat as well as a wind and damaging hail threat. The big day of the three is going to be tomorrow, Wednesday. Moderate risk from central Arkansas down into Alabama with a significant tornado risk, as well as a wind and significant hail risk as well. And then the more of the same on Thursday, just shifted east a little bit into the Carolinas down into Georgia. I'm going to focus mostly on Wednesday in this video, but we will definitely first discuss the threat for tonight, take a look at that, as well as touch on the Thursday threat at the end of this video as well. So let's get started here. If we take a zoomed out look here of the visible satellite, you can see we have some thunderstorms ongoing across the southeast already. And this little swirl over Arizona, that is going to be our upper low that is going to be the weather maker for this severe weather event. And it's a very compact upper low, very small in size, but very potent jet streak associated with that. We'll take a look at that in a second. Also, one thing we can note here is across South Texas, below these higher level clouds, you can see this area of low clouds that's just streaming to the north. That is the moisture transport that is going to occur and be in place, set the stage for the severe weather tonight. As we have surface flow that is out of the south. Let's go back here to our surface map. You can see nice southerly flow in place across Texas. We have a warm, moist air mass that's streaming north, as we said. 60s dew points up to about the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Over toward the central Texas area down to Del Rio, areas south have low to mid 60s dew points for the most part. 70s dew points lurking there. Houston, Galveston area, Corpus Christi down toward Brownsville. So moisture is in place down in Texas. That will stream northward. Let's go ahead and look at our mesoanalysis maps now. Here's our trough over Arizona. Very compact, closed low here at 500 millibars, but a very potent jet streak rounding the base of that trough. We're seeing 95 knots knot winds here at 500 millibars in that jet streak. And there's already southerly flow in place. As this jet streak traverses the Rockies, we should get pretty potent surface cyclogenesis here across eastern New Mexico into the Texas Panhandle. Pretty classic Lee cyclogenesis scenario here. And that will only serve to continue to pump moisture up as the low-level winds strengthen, and low-level jet strengthens out of the south this evening. Continue to pump moisture into the area and prime this entire region for severe storms tonight and tomorrow. Let's see our low-level jet. We do have some semblance of a low-level jet in place. There is maybe some very sort of broad cyclonic flow at the surface here. See, pressures are lower in this sort of region. Maybe broad cyclonic low in place there, cyclonic flow in place there. But the surface low will definitely concentrate here this evening as the trough ejects into the plains. And as a result, this low-level jet will strengthen, continue to be out of the south, and will set the stage for storms, mostly after dark tonight. Let's look at how this trough progresses. This is the NAM here. You can see our trough over Arizona. That moves east, and you see it doesn't really quite eject into the plains until about maybe sunset at the earliest. Probably right around then or just after, we'll start to see storm development. And we can see our surface low, our low-level jet really ramps up as we get surface cyclogenesis, Lee cyclogenesis, right there about right at sunset, just after sunset. You can see really potent surface low starts to develop, really well defined. Then that low-level jet ramps up by about midnight and will be in place for the storms this evening and will continue into tomorrow. We'll take a look at tomorrow in a second, of course. So this moisture, it will continue to stream up, especially as that surface low development takes place. The winds in the low levels strengthen. continue to pump this moisture up. And we can see the main setup here, we sort of have this dry line / Pacific front, similar to what we had on Saturday, that prompted the moderate risk in the Texas Panhandle. Had sort of this Pacific front scenario. But watch how quickly this starts to sweep in, really quickly. So the forcing with this is going to be really strong. However, shear vectors, keep in mind that orientation of the boundary. Shear vector is very much perpendicular to the initiating boundary here, this Pacific front. So that would bode well for discrete storms, although just the degree of forcing alone may allow a lot of storms to form on this. But as far as the shear vectors and their orientation to this boundary, definitely would promote a more discrete mode. The question is just the number of storms that are going to fire on this Pacific front. We'll likely also get storms along the warm front as the forcing arrives. These will form on the warm front and likely move just to the cold side of the boundary and remain elevated as they go into Kansas. Out here in the warm sector, though, across Oklahoma and North Texas, definitely could see storm development ahead of this Pacific front out in the warm sector. And these would likely be discrete storms just by nature. Sort of prefrontal storms are more discrete by nature. And this, given the degree of shear in place, should have a threat for all severe hazards. Let's just take a sounding here real quick from west central Oklahoma. And yeah, you see completely uncapped, very unstable air mass here, pretty deep moist layer, and large looping photographs in the low levels. So this is concerning tonight for Oklahoma and North Texas. If any storms can fire out here in the open warm sector, they will definitely have the opportunity to produce tornadoes, likely large hail as well, as they will be surface-based. Don't really see anything inhibiting these storms from being surface-based. Given the degree of warm advection, these will likely be surface-based storms out in the warm sector. So something to watch overnight here for Oklahoma and North Texas ahead of this Pacific front. And then we'll probably have eventually a kind of a broken line or a line of storms along this Pacific front. And that brings us into Wednesday, excuse me. So let's go ahead and back out here and really take a look at things, because this is obviously the biggest day of the three, moderate risk out for Arkansas down into Alabama. So let's take a look and see if we can figure out the storm mode, etc. Because when we're chasing in Dixie Alley, we don't go down there to chase the big shell cloud along a squall line. We chase Dixie Alley in the trees to see discrete tornado-producing supercells. And so let's really dive in here and look, are we going to see discrete supercells out of this? This is likely going to be a multi-mode sort of event. But let's diagnose the degree of discrete supercell possibilities here for this setup. So our main trough continues to move east. Again, this is the 12Z NAM. And throughout the day, you notice we start out here kind of with this almost split sort of jet streak here. A more meridionally or north-south oriented flow at 500 here across Oklahoma and North Texas, and then more sort of southwesterly in this sort of the piece of the jet streak here across Arkansas that moves into the southeast later on in the morning and early afternoon. One thing to note here is the incredible defluence aloft, or the spreading apart of the winds aloft. This is some of the most impressive defluence aloft that I've seen in a while. You can see the winds here over eastern Oklahoma, almost due south to north. And then here over the Mississippi Delta, they are almost due southwesterly. So you can see the spreading apart of these wind vectors. That creates rising motion. It kind of creates a vacuum. So you get diffluence or divergence of the wind vectors aloft. That allows the atmosphere needs to fill that void. So what happens? Air from below has to fill that void. And so it rises upward. And wherever there's defluence like this, you see rising motion. And that promotes storm development. So this is very impressive for a system here to have this much defluence aloft or divergence of the wind vector. So this is going to be centered across the southeast throughout the day. Doesn't really change much. Right in here is our best diffluence aloft with this potent jet streak. So one thing to note right off the bat there. Let's take a look now at really focus in here on these sort of any pieces of energy that might initiate storms here during the morning hours. So here we go. There's our jet streak here. And we see kind of these belts of enhanced winds here in the warm sector early on. This makes me a little bit concerned that we will have storms ongoing in the warm sector early on. Now by 12Z, 15Z, we start to get the main jet streak to impinge on the region. This has moved off. But let's go down to 700 millibars, see if we see any short waves here out in the warm sector early on Wednesday. So we have a little piece of energy here. You can see a little bit of a kink in the isobars here. This is a little shortwave trough here over Louisiana into Mississippi. This is going to fire off likely some storms, I would think, late tonight out ahead of the main mess in Oklahoma and Texas. This should fire off some storms here across eastern Louisiana, Mississippi, into Alabama early on. That moves off nicely, though, by late morning, early afternoon. And we don't really see anything until the afternoon hours, which is a good thing. So as far as little short waves that might kick off storms in the warm sector, that might clutter up things as far as the setup goes, it's pretty solid here. We see this one little shortwave here that might kick off some storms during the morning hours. That should move off, though. Those storms should move off to the east pretty rapidly, I would expect, setting the stage for a pretty clear warm sector, at least from that perspective. Now let's take a look at the elevated mix layer. We talked about that in our previous video. Usually in the biggest Dixie Alley setups have some sort of capping inversion, elevated mix layer, that inhibits storm development in the warm sector early on. And then once that cap is broken, then you get prefrontal storms to develop that are likely discrete. And most of the big days in Dixie Alley, April 27, 2011, days like that have had an EML in place to suppress storms in the warm sector early on. So let's take a look at some soundings out west. So our source region for the EML. This is Norman. Let's go to Amarillo. And we do see very steep lapse rates out here in Amarillo from about 600 millibars down toward almost the surface there. Very steep lapse rate plume there. Down toward Midland, much of the same. Del Rio, again, kind of this layer of steep lapse rates there. And down toward Brownsville, we do have steep lapse rates there as well. And so there's a good chance. Here's Shreveport. Shreveport, not too much. We saw some evidence of an EML on the Shreveport sounding the other day when we did our video discussion. And back toward Dallas even, there is a nice steep lapse rate plume there aloft. So I would expect that as this trough moves off to the west, and that there may be an EML in place early on, at least to some degree, over the warm sector. Right now, we can take a look at that we don't see that right now in the warm sector. This is Jackson, Mississippi, and Birmingham, pretty much fully unstable here at these two sites. So there's not really an EML in place now. Will we get some to advect westward or eastward throughout the day today to set up for tomorrow? I would think there might be some degree of EML over this region. And we can see what the models are showing here. Let's take a look at 15Z Wednesday and just kind of take a sounding here out in the prefrontal warm sector. And to better visualize sort of where these features are, I'll go ahead and do that. So here's our sort of Pacific front / pseudo dry line way off to the west here by 15Z, 10 a.m. Central Time, Wednesday. This will be back here in East Texas, eastern Oklahoma, and then our prefrontal warm sector out here in Arkansas. So this is promising. So take a look at the sounding. We pulled it from Arkansas, and wow, this is very impressive for a Dixie Alley setup. When you see this EML that's going to suppress storms, we, if this is the case, are probably not going to see any storms. Um, if we do, they're going to be elevated storms, but I would expect that we're not going to see a lot in the way of storm development, given the lack of short waves early on. There, our one short wave we saw has moved off to the east by this point. EML in place over the warm sector, and so that's a very good sign. Let's take one up here a little farther south in Louisiana, just to kind of sample. We'll take one out here in Mississippi as well, just to kind of see if there's an EML in place. And we do see definitely a sort of a warmer layer here in Mississippi. So storms likely to be not ongoing in Mississippi there. Same thing in Louisiana. That is pretty impressive for a morning sounding the day of a big severe weather event. That's what we like to see. A pretty sharp, well-defined capping inversion to suppress storm development. So given the fact that we're going to lack a lot of forcing in the warm sector, and there's likely to be an EML in place, the warm sector, I would assume, at least given this NAM depiction of it, is fairly likely to stay relatively clear throughout the morning hours. Let's move on to 18Z here. See the moisture is streaming north. Here's our warm front, kind of oriented northwest to southeast from southwest Arkansas into Alabama down into Georgia. Let's take a look out here. We'll take some more soundings here from the open warm sector and see how we're doing. So there's still a little bit of an inversion left here out in the warm sector. By this point, is that enough to suppress storm development? Hard to say. It is definitely possible. Now out here, where we took this last sounding, I can't remember exactly where it was, but this is fully unstable now. But out in the open warm sector across Mississippi and Alabama, definitely going to be still capped, it looks like here, at 18Z. So as far as prefrontal storms go, I think we've got a chance here to have storms go out ahead of the main cold front. And then here you go at 21Z. We're fully unstable now across Mississippi, central Mississippi. And so then we might see storms start to develop here about 21Z or so. And it's important to note that there will likely be storms ongoing along this Pacific front in the morning hours. And that we're looking out here in the warm sector. Again, if we take a look at our shear vectors, they were fairly perpendicular for our setup tonight. Not quite as favorable, but it's kind of right on the verge for discrete storms. It looks about 45 degrees or so there. So that would promote at least some discrete structures along this Pacific front. So if we get redevelopment Wednesday afternoon along this Pacific front, especially with southern extent, our shear vectors look a little bit more perpendicular here than up in Arkansas. We may see at least maybe a broken line rather than a full-on squall line here along the Pacific front. A more broken line of maybe semi-discrete storms here along the front. So we've established storm mode. Might be discrete here. Our warm sector likely to stay fairly clear, at least on this depiction from the NAM. And then, so let's take a look now at if there are any triggers, like a prefrontal surface trough for warm sector storms. And so here's our warm front. You can see the boundary there. And here's our Pacific front. And it looks like we might have a little bit of a kink there across central Mississippi, some kinks in the isobars there. Yeah, definitely there you go by 21Z. There's a little bit of a kink in the isobars there. Maybe a focus for development here across central eastern Mississippi into western Alabama there. So I'm liking what I'm seeing as far as our chances for prefrontal storms. And now, given this environment, a strongly sheared environment, these would have the potential to produce strong tornadoes, likely large hail, given the instability, very unstable profile. And there will be a tornado threat with these for sure. But you notice that from that sounding, that photograph, not quite your typical Dixie, just classic meat hooking sounding. And one of the reasons why, here's our 850 winds. There is a low-level jet in place across the day, across the region throughout the day, 40 to 50 knots here. But then after dark, it really starts to ramp up across Alabama. So in comparison with past Dixie events, we oftentimes see a low-level jet ramp up during the day across this region. Which really loops those photographs, really lengthens those and curves those low-level photographs. The low-level jet looks like it's going to ramp up after dark here across Alabama into Tennessee, and this the kinematics will still be in place. Thermodynamics will still be in place given the strong warm advection. And there's your photograph. That's just as the low-level jet really increases. Look at the photographs here. Now this is showing elevated storms here. Let's go farther south down into Alabama maybe, where this low-level jet is ramped up. Yeah, there you go. We're unstable, a little bit of convective contamination here, but assuming strong warm advection at the surface, this photograph is nuts. There would be the potential for strong, significant tornadoes across Alabama overnight, given the low-level jet ramp up. But not your typical sort of just huge monster low-level jet throughout the region. It's going to be more of a tempered low-level jet for southeast outbreak standards, but the parameters, wind profile is definitely there to support tornadoes. So kind of a multi-mode sort of thing here. Let's take a look now at the cams. We'll start with the HER here. Obviously, take these with a grain of salt. We're still a day ahead. Cams are to be used with extreme caution here this far out. But here's tonight. You can see the HER starts to firestorms about 1Z, 2Z here in western Oklahoma. Those are kind of along the warm front there, maybe just north of the warm front, elevated into as they move into northern Oklahoma and Kansas. But these would have a tornado threat if they were surface-based and could ride that warm front or get just into the warm sector to the south. And there you go. There's some storms that we saw. Remember our little shortwave we were looking at across Louisiana, Mississippi early on in the morning of Wednesday. Likely the driver behind these storms here across northern Mississippi and Alabama. And then along the Pacific front, by about midnight, we get to see development. You can see it's not just a full-on line. It's more kind of sort of broken convection along this line. And given the shear vector is more perpendicular to the initiating boundary of that Pacific front, I would expect that to be the case. Kind of a broken line continues into Arkansas and Louisiana by early afternoon, and we start to see these blips in the warm sector. Let me kind of toggle the view here to the southeast sector. Yeah, so you can see the warm sector stays relatively clear. We've got these storms ongoing to the north, really the main region of interest. But the warm sector you can see is very clear here across central Mississippi and western Alabama. And then by about midday, we start to get these blips, these beans to go in the warm sector well out ahead of everything. Cold front is back here. These beans are going well out ahead into central Alabama. These would have the potential, if they could really sustain themselves, to produce tornadoes. And then overnight across, and then right about late afternoon, we start to see this line ramp up again. Remember, shear vectors not quite as perpendicular here on Wednesday afternoon as they were for Tuesday night in regards to storm mode, so a little bit more of a messy mode along that along that Pacific front. But you can see just numerous beans extending all the way out to eastern Georgia. And that's oftentimes what you get with these Dixie Alley setups, is beans way out ahead of the main line. And then you get some storms here in eastern Mississippi, right about 0Z, just ahead of that cold front, the main line. By this time, the low-level jet is starting to strengthen. Photographs starting to lengthen. So there will be a tornado threat with these storms as well. Large hail, they can stay discreet. And we kind of get sort of this band of convection to continue on into into Alabama. Again, photographs very favorable for significant tornadoes here across Alabama in the late evening and overnight hours. So something to watch for there. And then it moves off to the east Thursday morning. Let's now look at the WRF ARW for tonight. So we can see by 2Z, nothing is ongoing here across Oklahoma and Texas like we saw with the HER. Then finally about 3 to 4Z, we get storms to form right along that warm front. Those will likely be elevated storms moving off into Kansas. Of course, any storm on the southern end here that can attach to that warm front or get just into the warm sector would have a tornado threat. And then here about 8Z, we start to see really sort of not really much convection along this front. Then we get those storms out ahead, as we saw on the HER. But look at the warm sector there. Warm sector 14Z. Let me switch the view here. Warm sector by 14Z is nice and clear. Very nice and clear. A lot of stuff going on along the warm front, along the Pacific front there in the morning, which might modulate where that warm front sets up. But you can see we're perfectly clear here in the warm sector. And we start to get these little showers to go in the warm sector, and then these would likely be supercells producing tornadoes out in the open warm sector. And wow, that's pretty. This is a pretty impressive plot here. And notice again, it's well out ahead of the Pacific front. See kind of this broken band along the Pacific front. Lots of beans out ahead, eastern Mississippi into Alabama, and then those move off into Georgia. The main line takes over, and that is the rest of the event. NSSL WRF, finally. Let me go back to South Central. All right, so tonight, not much before about 3Z here, and we get storms to fire right near sort of the warm front. These look to be supercells, possibly elevated, again, possibly not, if these are on the warm front or just south. But not a whole lot along the Pacific front here, which is interesting. We see into Wednesday morning again. I've seen some people also talk about this sort of target here: Missouri Boot Heel, eastern Arkansas, western Tennessee. Looks like all the models are showing some storms in that area early on that may clutter things up. It looks like to me, though, the most interesting bet for discrete storms is going to be out here in Mississippi and Alabama in the open warm sector, which on this model, once again, is remaining pretty dry for most of the morning. Our initial shortwave kicks off those storms, likely to be clearing behind those storms. Then we get lots of beans to fire out eastern Mississippi into Alabama. And then this is concerning. Look at this broken line along the Pacific front here, 23Z. Broken line of supercells capable of producing tornadoes, maybe some significant. And then we kind of get a little bit more messy. Some semblance of storms out here in eastern Mississippi right ahead of that Pacific front. So a very interesting setup nonetheless. And this is going to be more of the same for Thursday. We're going to have this line ongoing in the morning. Likely warm advection, strong warm advection going across the Carolinas into Georgia. And that would promote potentially prefrontal supercell development out there in this region, in the enhanced risk area, Thursday afternoon. So very interesting setup. I'm a little bit more, I guess, positive if you're from a chasing perspective about prefrontal warm sector storms on Wednesday, well out ahead of everything. Central to eastern Mississippi into central Alabama. Looks like we may be able to get prefrontal storms well out ahead of the main cold front. But so something to watch. It's going to be multi-mode for sure. We'll have definitely this sort of line of storms along the Pacific front. Looks like a little bit more likely that we'll get some beans well out ahead of the front. And then along this warm front could get some storms that will produce maybe a significant tornado. However, storm motion to the northeast. Let me go up here. And if we see that our warm front is oriented more like this, notice how quickly the storms are going to cross that front and likely become elevated. But any storm that interacts with that warm front, there is enhanced vorticity along that front. So that would be, they would have a significant tornado threat as well. And like we said, overnight in Alabama could be a pretty crazy night for the northern half of Alabama, given the huge ramp up in the low-level jet. So definitely a dangerous few days ahead. This does have the potential to be an outbreak. Likely will be a lot of severe weather reports. The threat for discrete supercells looks fairly good, given that there's going to be some capping and not much forcing for storms in the warm sector early on, and that shear vectors are actually nice and fairly parallel to or fairly perpendicular to the Pacific front, at least for Dixie Alley standards. So interesting day ahead for sure. Targets to be refined, chase targets to be refined throughout the day today. And we'll see what happens, see what the 0Z models tonight bring and how things look. So if you live in any of these areas, particularly the orange and red areas here from central Arkansas down into Alabama, and then in the Carolinas and Georgia on Thursday, stay weather aware, have a safety plan, have a plan ready to go in case severe weather approaches your location. This could be a pretty widespread severe weather outbreak, so the chances that you'll see severe weather are a little bit higher than usual. So make sure you have a plan in place and you're ready to act on that plan if severe weather is on the way to your area. So that's all I've got for today. Thanks for watching, and if you're chasing out there, please stay safe. It's going to be another tough Dixie chase, but could be very rewarding if we get the discrete supercell threat to materialize as far as from a chase perspective. Obviously, don't want to see anybody affected by strong tornadoes as far as loss of life and property. On one hand, we hope that this is a messy event and that the tornado threat's somewhat negated, but from a chase perspective, from the science perspective, a discrete supercell threat is definitely on the table. So again, thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.